There is something you need to understand right now, and the fact that you are hearing this is not random. Pain, the kind you feel deeply, does not come from what happens outside of you. It comes from what happens inside your mind after the event has already passed. Two people can walk through the exact same situation, stand in the same moment, hear the same words, and yet walk away carrying completely different worlds within them. One collapses under the weight of it, while the other somehow rises, stronger, clearer, almost transformed. What creates that difference is not reality itself, but the meaning that is assigned to it. Carl Jung once said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And what this really means is that much of your suffering is not chosen consciously. It is shaped by hidden patterns, old wounds, silent beliefs that operate beneath your awareness. You're not just reacting to what is happening now, you're reacting to everything your mind has learned to associate with it. The story you tell yourself becomes more powerful than the event itself. Imagine rejection. On the surface, it is just an event. Someone chooses not to stay, not to respond, not to reciprocate, but what follows is where suffering is created. One mind says, "This means I am not enough. This confirms every fear I have ever carried. This proves I will always be left behind." Another mind looks at the same moment and says, "This is not alignment. This is not meant for me. This clears space for something more true." The event is identical, but the meaning splits into two completely different realities. One leads into pain that deepens, the other into a kind of quiet liberation. Most people never question the meaning they assign. They assume their interpretation is truth, but in reality, interpretation is shaped by what has not yet been healed. If you carry abandonment within you, you will begin to see it everywhere, even when it is not fully there. If you carry insecurity, you will detect threat in neutral situations. Your mind becomes a filter, and that filter is not neutral. It is colored by everything unresolved inside you. You do not suffer because of what happens. You suffer because of what it represents to you. Think about losing something important, like a job. For one person, it feels like collapse, like everything is ended. For another, it becomes an opening, an unexpected shift toward something better. The situation is the same, but the internal meaning reshapes the experience entirely. When you believe that everything happening to you is a form of loss, your life begins to feel like a series of misfortunes. But when you begin to look for meaning, for growth, for something hidden within the difficulty, your life starts to feel like a process instead of a punishment. So the real question becomes this: what are you telling yourself about what is happening to you right now? And is that story absolutely true? Or is it simply familiar? Because the mind prefers what is familiar, even when it hurts. It repeats patterns not because they are accurate, but because they are known. You can begin to shift this by becoming aware in the moment pain appears. Instead of immediately reacting, pause and ask yourself what meaning you're attaching. Ask if you are amplifying the situation, if you are assuming the worst, if there is another way to see it that you have not yet considered. Often the pain is not only in the event, but in the interpretation layered on top of it. Jung believed that what hurts you most often points to what you most need to understand. So instead of avoiding discomfort, you can begin to explore it. When something triggers you deeply, ask what it is revealing about you. Not about the other person, not about the situation, but about your inner world. Because every strong reaction carries information. Another important shift is learning not to take everything personally. Much of what you interpret as rejection or attack is not about you at all. People act from their own fears, their own limitations, their own unconscious patterns. When you interpret everything as a reflection of your worth, you create unnecessary suffering. Not everything is a judgment of you. Not everything is a sign that you're lacking. There is also a tendency to demand immediate understanding. When something happens, the mind rushes to explain it, to categorize it, to give it meaning right away. But not everything can be understood in the moment it occurs. Sometimes meaning only becomes clear with distance. When you force answers too early, you exhaust yourself. When you allow uncertainty to exist, you create space for clarity to emerge naturally. You can also begin to observe your life as if you were watching it from the outside. Imagine your experiences as scenes in a story. When you create even a small distance between yourself and your emotions, you begin to see that everything is temporary. Moments pass, feelings rise and fall, and within that awareness, you regain a sense of choice. You are no longer completely controlled by what you feel. When this shift begins to happen, something subtle but powerful changes. You stop reacting to everything with the same intensity. You stop seeing every loss as final. You begin to notice opportunities where you once only saw problems. And gradually, you realize that suffering is not something imposed on you. It is something constructed within you, and therefore something that can be reshaped. But there is a deeper layer beneath all of this. Even if you change your interpretation, suffering can still persist if you remain attached. Attachment is where the mind clings to how things should be, how people should behave, how life should unfold. And when reality does not match that expectation, tension appears. This brings us to the next step, which is learning to release attachment to what you cannot control. Because one of the strongest sources of suffering is the need to control what is inherently uncontrollable. You want people to act according to your expectations. You want outcomes to follow your plans. You want certainty in a world that is fundamentally uncertain. And when that certainty does not come, frustration builds. The truth is simple, but difficult to accept. Life does not adjust itself to your expectations. And the longer you resist that, the more tension you create within yourself. Jung spoke about how attachment ties us to suffering because we cling to images in our mind instead of accepting what is actually happening. Look at your own experiences. How many times have you tried to change someone, hoping they would become what you needed, only to feel disappointed when they did not? How many times have you planned something carefully, only to feel overwhelmed when it unfolded differently? The pain does not come from the event itself, but from your resistance to it. People do not transform because you want them to. They change when they are ready, when something within them shifts. And life does not follow your script. It moves in ways that are often unpredictable. When you try to force control over everything, you create friction. When you learn to move with what happens, you reduce that friction. This does not mean becoming passive or giving up. It means recognizing the difference between what is within your control and what is not. You cannot control other people's thoughts, emotions, or decisions, but you can control how you respond to them. You cannot control every situation, but you can control the meaning you assign to it. When you focus your energy only on what depends on you, something changes. You feel lighter because you are no longer carrying the weight of things that were never yours to carry in the first place. There is also fear in letting go. Many people hold on because they believe that without certain people or outcomes, they will not be okay. But true stability does not come from external things. It comes from your relationship with yourself. When you learn to be at peace without clinging, you become steady in a way that external circumstances cannot easily disturb. Expectations also play a role here. When you expect life to follow a specific path, disappointment becomes almost inevitable. But when you replace expectation with acceptance, you become more adaptable. Acceptance does not mean you stop wanting things. It means you stop resisting reality as it is. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to understand that everything is temporary. What feels overwhelming today will not feel the same in the future. What seems permanent is often just a moment passing through your life. Suffering grows stronger when you believe things will last forever. But when you see the impermanence of everything, the intensity begins to soften. But even if you begin to release attachment to external outcomes, there is still another layer that determines whether you suffer or not. And that layer exists entirely within you. Because no matter what happens outside, your inner world continues to respond, react, and interpret. If you do not understand that inner world, it will continue to shape your experience in ways you do not fully see. This is where emotional mastery becomes essential. Not the suppression of emotions, not the denial of what you feel, but the ability to observe, understand, and move through your emotions without being controlled by them. Because emotions themselves are not the problem. The problem begins when you become identified with them, when you believe that what you feel in a moment defines who you are. Jung spoke about something he called the shadow. The shadow is not simply the dark part of you, but the hidden part, the part that was pushed away because it was not accepted, not allowed, or not understood. It contains anger, fear, insecurity, desire, even strength that was never expressed. And when this part remains unconscious, it does not disappear. It continues to influence your reactions from beneath the surface. When you feel sudden anger that seems stronger than the situation requires, when fear appears out of proportion, when sadness feels overwhelming, often it is not just about the present moment. It is something deeper, something older, something that has not yet been integrated. The shadow is speaking, but because it is unconscious, it speaks through emotion rather than clarity. Most people try to control emotions by pushing them away, but suppression does not resolve anything. It only pushes the energy deeper, where it gains more power. The more you resist what you feel, the more intense it becomes. But when you begin to observe your emotions, instead of immediately reacting to them, something shifts. Imagine standing in the middle of a storm. If you fight the waves, you are exhausted. If you try to deny the storm, you are overwhelmed. But if you learn to stay present within it, to move with it, you are no longer powerless. Emotions are similar. They move through you, but they do not have to define you. The first step is awareness. When you feel something strongly, pause. Instead of saying, I am anxious or I am angry, begin to say, I am experiencing anxiety. I am experiencing anger. This small shift creates distance. It reminds you that you are not the emotion itself, but the observer of it. Then begin to question it. Where is this feeling coming from? Is it entirely about this moment, or is it connected to something from the past? Often you will realize that what you're feeling now is amplified by something unresolved. The present becomes a trigger, not the full cause. Your internal dialogue also plays a powerful role. The way you speak to yourself can intensify or soften what you feel. When you tell yourself that something is unbearable, your body reacts accordingly. But when you remind yourself that it is temporary, that you can handle it, the intensity begins to decrease. Instead of only reacting to emotions, begin to understand them. If something repeatedly creates pain in your life, it is not random. It is pointing to something that needs attention. Jung believed that growth happens when we face what we avoid. The parts of yourself that you ignore are often the parts that need to be understood the most. There are simple ways to begin this process. Breathing consciously can help regulate your body before your mind reacts. Writing your emotions down can create clarity. When you see your thoughts on paper, they often lose their intensity. Naming your emotions also reduces their power. When you say, "This is fear, this is frustration," you begin to step out of it. Emotions are energy. If they are not expressed or processed, they remain inside you and turn into tension. But when you direct them, they can be transformed. Anger can become action. Anxiety can become movement. Sadness can become reflection. The goal is not to eliminate emotions, but to work with them. As you begin to understand your emotions, something changes. You become less reactive. You stop being pulled into cycles of the same pain. You begin to respond with more awareness, and gradually you feel a sense of stability that does not depend on what is happening around you. But even beyond emotions, there is another pattern that keeps many people trapped in suffering, and that is the belief that life is happening to them, rather than something they are participating in. This is what we call the victim mindset. The victim mindset is subtle. It does not always appear as obvious helplessness. Sometimes it appears as constant frustration, as the belief that things never work out, that others are always the cause of your pain, that life is unfair in a way that specifically targets you. But what this mindset does is remove your sense of agency. It makes you feel like you have no control, and that feeling alone creates suffering. There is a difficult truth here. No one is coming to rescue you, and while that may sound harsh, it is actually empowering, because the moment you stop waiting for something external to change your life, you begin to realize that you have more control than you thought. Many people unconsciously believe three things: that they have no control over their circumstances, that life is unfair to them, and that they need recognition or help from others to move forward. These beliefs create a cycle where nothing changes, because all the power is placed outside. But if you look at people who have transformed their lives, you will notice something different. At some point, they stopped waiting. They stopped blaming. They accepted responsibility, not for everything that happened to them, but for what they would do next. Changing this begins with awareness. Pay attention to how you describe your life. If your language is filled with phrases like, "This always happens to me," or "I never get what I want," you are reinforcing a pattern of powerlessness. But when you shift your language to, I choose how to respond, or I can change this, you begin to reclaim control. Then identify where you feel stuck. What situations repeat in your life? What do you complain about the most? These patterns often show where you have unconsciously adopted a passive role, and once you see it, you can begin to change it. Responsibility does not mean blaming yourself. It means recognizing where you have influence. You cannot change the past, but you can decide how it shapes you. You cannot control others, but you can choose how you respond. You cannot avoid all obstacles, but you can decide how you face them. Another important step is releasing the need for external validation. When you depend on others to confirm your value, you give away your power. The world is not always fair, and people will not always recognize what you do. But your worth is not determined by that recognition. Action is also essential. Change does not come from thinking alone. It comes from doing something, even something small. When you take action, you prove to yourself that you are not powerless, and that changes the way you see yourself. When you begin to shift out of the victim mindset, your experience of life changes. You feel more capable. You handle challenges with more strength. And most importantly, you stop focusing only on what is wrong and start focusing on what can be done. But there is still one final piece that transforms the way you experience suffering, and that is meaning. Because suffering without meaning feels unbearable, but suffering with meaning becomes something else entirely. When you have no clear direction, even small difficulties can feel overwhelming. But when you have a purpose, something that matters deeply to you, pain becomes part of a larger process. It is no longer just something to endure. It becomes something that contributes to your growth. Jung spoke about the idea of becoming whole, of integrating all parts of yourself. And within that process, suffering plays a role. It is not something to be eliminated completely, but something to be understood and transformed. Think about people who have gone through difficult experiences and emerged stronger. What makes the difference is not the absence of pain, but the presence of meaning. They found something that made their experience valuable, something that gave it purpose. This does not mean you need to seek suffering. It means that when it appears, you can choose how to relate to it. You can ask what it is teaching you. You can ask how it is shaping you. You can ask how it might help you grow or even help others. Often your purpose is connected to your experiences. What you struggle with may point toward what matters to you. What you overcome may become something you can share. Your pain does not define you, but it can inform the direction you take. Finding purpose does not require having everything figured out. It begins with small steps. Paying attention to what gives you energy, what feels meaningful, what draws your interest. Over time, this becomes clearer. It is also important to understand that purpose evolves. What matters to you now may change, and that is natural. Growth is not static. It is a continuous process. When you find something greater than your pain, your relationship with suffering changes. You become more resilient. You see challenges differently. You feel more connected to your life instead of feeling trapped within it. In the end, suffering is part of being human, but it does not have to define your life. Every difficult moment carries the possibility of transformation, not automatically, but through awareness, through choice, through the way you engage with it. You are not defined by what happens to you. You are shaped by how you understand it, how you respond to it, and what you create from it. The question is not, why is this happening to me? The question is, what can I become through this? And when you begin to ask that question, something changes. Pain is no longer only a burden. It becomes a guide, a signal, a doorway into a deeper understanding of yourself. And in that process, you do not eliminate suffering completely, but you move beyond being controlled by it. You begin to live with more clarity, more strength, and a deeper sense of meaning. That is where true freedom begins.